I grew up in Queens, New York, and like many middle school students in the boroughs of New York City, the big question that arises as soon as you enter the 8th grade is what high school will you be going to? And for some, it'll be a religiously affiliated one. And for others, it'll be a private prep, charter, alternative, or zoned program. And for a select few, they'll compete for a seat in a New York City specialized high school. And I'm from Queens, New York, so of course I had to compete. I pressed my mother every day for about a month to pay for an expensive tutoring program to help me do well on the New York City specialized high school admissions exam. And due to my phenomenal negotiation skills at 13, I was in the class shortly after. And my excitement for the program ended on the first day. I was in a classroom with about 10 other students from across Queens, New York, all of them either white or Asian and identified as male, including my teacher. And at that time, I was about 5'5", identified as a girl of color, and clearly stood out. And the initial gender imbalance within the classroom was overtaken by the overall sense of entitlement that existed within the students. Quickly, they started to form community based off of their physical characteristics and their social constructs. They felt psychologically safe to speak up, to ask questions, and to seek mentorship. And their entitlement was reinforced by the teacher's actions to gravitate towards those who spoke up the most. His gravitation towards students that would dare to solve challenging algebraic expressions on the chalkboard and whose parents could help them with challenging homework assignments reinforced my feelings as an outsider. And as a 13-year-old full of hopes and dreams, it was upsetting that I could feel that my goals were becoming out of reach. I was embarrassed to ask questions, and even more so ashamed to realize that I spent money that my family couldn't really afford. It was the first time I questioned if I belonged there, if I had a right to dream bigger, and if I could really compete in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. According to the World Economic Forum, technology will continue to impact the way that we learn, work, and connect with others. Meaning the next generation of social change agents, entrepreneurs, and STEM activists will need to be equipped to be able to leverage technology and science to shape a new socioeconomic structure with universally accessible opportunities and experiences. Yet this next generation of social change agents, also known as Gen Z, will be the most diverse in American history. Almost half will identify as non-white and come from spaces that have been underestimated. And their experiences around racial injustice and educational inequity will be reinforced by the educational system that influences how they learn and gather information. And this is the same system that has been built upon racism, gender bias, and a lack of universally accessible technology, information, and resources. And in truth, this is the system that continues to perpetuate cycles of socioeconomic oppression and discrimination. Yet, as we become excited for all that STEM can give us, we cannot ignore the fact that educational achievement gaps within brown and black communities still exist, that gender underrepresentation in STEM-based higher educational careers is still an issue, and that we continue to lack transparency into an educational system that fails our youth of color. However, with all of this information, I had to take a step back and ask myself, how has the US educational system impacted my narrative? After earning a bachelor's of science in computer science and mathematics, I went on to earn a master's in information science and knowledge management from Columbia University. And I became obsessed with data science. And mainly throughout my professional and academic journey, it's because I had to come to terms with the fact that I have been represented as a half-truth statistic. And like many overlooked narratives, a series of statistical analyses piecemealed my educational experiences into half-examined thoughts that tried to predict my future outcomes. And from a strictly data-driven perspective, many statistics try to sum up my educational and professional trajectory based off of structural racism. And this includes the fact that as a woman of color, I make up about 40% of the total population of women in the United States. Yet, 11.2% of undergraduate degrees in computer science and engineering, 8.2% of master's degrees in science and engineering, and 4.1% of doctoral degrees in science and engineering are awarded to us. And this leads to the fact that about 50% of the US low-wage labor force is comprised of women of color. And of course, those statistics can start to sound even more disheartening if I start to sprinkle in the neighborhood I was raised in and my second generation Afro-Latina heritage. Yet, inequitable access to technology and resources, structural racism, and the one-sided statistics that I mentioned have a cost. As globalization and technology continue to impact the way economies and communities grow and develop, we need a holistic approach to how we rebuild educational systems, to how we improve access to technology, and how we open up opportunities to use data science to translate overlooked narratives. In fact, we need overlooked spaces to be able to leverage data science to combat the misinformation that continues to plague the way that we approach educational outcomes in diverse communities. We need Black voices and voices of color to be able to use science and technology to end poverty, to increase access to healthcare, to tackle climate change, and most importantly, to lead in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And an important step in this reclaiming and revolution is to acknowledge the fact that the imbalanced use of data science, the knowledge hoarding, and the lack of access to technology and resources have put all of our futures at risk. And my step around challenging and looking at the statistics presented to me around being a woman of color in STEM allowed me to unpack some truths that exist for girls of color within the US educational system. And when we look at the gender underrepresentation and the achievement gaps, we cannot ignore the fact that this starts in the classroom. And due to cognitive biases and structural racism, girls of color are 12% more likely than their white counterparts to be more harshly disciplined in school, and are even more likely to be overlooked for educational opportunities and experiences by their teacher. And this not only makes education a barrier for psychological safety, but also it hinders opportunities for learning. It hinders opportunities to explore pathways in STEM. And most importantly, it hinders opportunities for girls of color to believe that they can compete in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And this is significant because according to the United Nations, by the year 2030, more than 167 million children will live in extreme poverty if the world does not take action to improve educational experiences and access to relevant training material for girls of color and underestimated communities. As you can start to see, the costs of structural racism and educational inequity are really adding up. And yet the inequitable experiences faced by youth of color not only negatively impacts population growth, health outcomes, and community well-being, but the World Bank reports that not adequately giving girls, and in particular girls of color, access to relevant educational experiences and training resources deprives countries of upwards of $30 trillion in lost lifetime earnings and productivity. More specifically, if the US does not take action to improve educational structures through the use of data science and technology, we will be deprived of the opportunity to elevate the fastest growing sector of small business owners, startup founders, entrepreneurs, and activists in this country, which are Latinx and Black women. These women make up the largest growing workforce in the US and are projected to have a 40% increase in employment representation. This means that by elevating future Black and Latinx women through STEM, by giving them equitable access to training and educational opportunities, will continue to increase their significant contribution to the nation's gross domestic product. They will continue to add tens of trillions of dollars to the US economy while also supporting positive health outcomes, community well-being, and of course, leading the future of innovation in STEM work. People specifically targeted by inequitable and oppressive structures are not the only ones impacted. People who witness inequity are also vastly deprived. As we reimagine a future of work and all that's in stake for building and creating new technology, resources, and structures, I urge you to remember the following. Education without social action is a one-sided value. Data science without investigating the structures and the systems that reinforce the narratives are useless. As you push forward your ideas for social change, challenge the policies and the people that continue to build and reinforce oppressive educational structures. With an in-depth analysis of data science, knowledge through your experiences, and empathy in the technology that you build and use, challenge the truths that exist for opponents of equity with your overlooked narrative. Thank you.